After the disturbances around Britain, she's been expressing her dismay, and she met the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police to find out more, and she is with me now. Priti Patel, as we leave the lockdown, are you beginning to be concerned that across the streets of this country, the police are in some places losing control?
Well, what concerns me, Andrew, is the fact that we are seeing people, mass gatherings. We are in the midst of a global pandemic still, a health crisis and a health emergency, that people are still gathering in quite inappropriate ways. And obviously we have seen in recent weeks protests, demonstrations that have turned ugly and violent. I've seen far too many assaults on our hard-working, our outstanding police officers. That is unacceptable. And then more recently, in the last week or so, we've seen gatherings, street parties, people behaving in ways in which that, quite frankly, are just not right
Yes.
and not proper. So with regards to policing, I spend every day speaking to our policing leadership across the country, almost every day with frontline officers as well. And our officers are resilient, they are remarkable. I think they've been true heroes throughout the global pandemic, throughout the last 13 weeks with coronavirus. But the fact of the matter is, we still have this disease in our communities, in society. We need people to be conscientious and act responsibly.
And yet people are not acting responsibly. I mean, you talk about street parties, and let's just remind ourselves, look at some of the pictures from Brixton. This was, as it were, a street party, a very, very violent street party, and some really nasty confrontations here. Is that not a sign of, as it were, law and order breaking down on the streets of London?
Well, first of all, what we saw was unacceptable. Police officers were assaulted and injured. There were a number of police officers that were injured that night, which is absolutely shocking. We've seen violent behaviour. I mean, that violent behaviour will be met with law enforcement. That is effectively what the police do. I have actually spoken to the Metropolitan Police Commissioner. I've made it quite clear if more support was required or needed for the police, more resources, and quite frankly, we will do whatever's needed. But it's behaviour. Behaviour is the key thing here right now. Those types of behaviours will do very little to stop the spread of the virus right now. And where we see criminality, violent behaviour, as I said when we saw the protests a few weeks ago, thuggishness and violent behaviour is simply unacceptable, and the police will do the right thing. They will enforce the law.
Do you think we need to see fewer big mass gatherings on the streets of Britain in total? We've had 2 nights now, where people in Liverpool have been celebrating their football victory in very, very large numbers. We saw the Black Lives Matter demonstrations as well. Do we have to stop coming out into the streets in these large numbers at this time?
My own view is yes, we do. Congratulations to Liverpool for winning, but even so, and fans of course want to celebrate, but they did not need to go to the football ground and congregate outside the stadium. You know, as much as people do want to be out right now, the weather is amazing. Stick to the rules, follow the guidance. We've made it quite clear that, 6 or more people, no one should be gathering in more than six or more people. But also when it comes to protests, there are other ways in which people can express their views and opinions. And with Black Lives Matter, there are legitimate voices, legitimate causes, legitimate issues that were being aired at the time. And of course, I'm a member of the government. We're all working and listening to many of those really challenging and difficult issues around injustice, social justice. We want to right some wrongs there, absolutely, and do much more to help and support people. But protesting right now will not help us get control of this awful disease, this horrible virus, and stop the spread of it.
Your colleague Andrew Bridgen says that he thinks the Met has lost control of the streets. I know you spoke to Cressida Dick, the head of the Met, a couple of days ago. What explanation did you get of those scenes, and are you reassured?
I am, because we should always remember as well, Andrew, that of course operational decisions around policing are independent from the Home Secretary and from the government. But it's right that I have those conversations. As I've said, I want to make sure that our police, who in my view are the finest in the world, are resourced, absolute resourced and equipped and are supported by this government. We have an exceptional working relationship with them. But in terms of, what we have seen on the streets, we're seeing pockets of behaviour. We are not seeing, mass disobedience. We're seeing pockets of behaviour. And it's right.
I'm sorry to jump in. It seems to be spreading a bit. And I wonder if that's something to do with the fact that the very first really big demonstration, the Black Lives Matter, we saw statues being pulled down and defaced, and the police standing by and letting that happen. And I wonder if that has perhaps sent the wrong message to other people.
Well, the police make operational decisions in terms of how they police. They know much more in terms of the situation analysis, the intelligence behind protests. They engage with many of the community organisers as well. They know much more than we would actually know at that particular time. And so obviously I follow up on those conversations. But I think first and foremost, when it came to the protests and the disobedience and the disorder that we saw, the police arrested individuals and investigations followed. That's absolutely right. That is maintaining law and order and enforcing law and order. When we're seeing street parties, we don't want to see street parties, but they are happening. And it's right. And I was in touch, in fact, the Commissioner was in touch with me overnight as well about this issue. The police do the right thing. They will absolutely enforce around disobedience, violence, disorder. That is what they do. But of course, at the same time, we all as leaders within our communities, in government, in policing, will continue to make that case. Do not meet. Meeting will not help those individuals in the long run, or the communities within which they're from.
Well, another kind of meeting is going to start again on Saturday when the pubs reopen. We had Jeremy Farrar from Sage saying be very, very cautious to people about going to the pub, going to mingle with lots of people from different and now, I don't know whether you ever go to the pub or not, but what would be your advice to people wondering, should I go down the pub on Saturday?
Well, I think first of all, there's been a great deal of work across government in terms of investing in the hospitality sector. So pubs, restaurants, bars, to get them reopened, it's all part of the roadmap that the government has outlined. So guidance is in place around social distancing. And of course, those venues will open with social distancing guidelines and measures in place. And that's great. We support restarting that part of the economy. Jobs and livelihoods are at stake here. In terms of people going, I would say go, be responsible, follow the guidance, practice social distancing, follow the hygiene as well. Washing hands and all the hygiene methods are so important. But I come back to my point, Andrew, that we are living with this virus right now. We don't have a vaccine. So it's incumbent upon all of us to make sure that we keep our distance. We can enjoy ourselves in a very responsible... Yes, we can enjoy ourselves in a responsible way, but be conscientious of other people around us.
It's just that the Police Federation, for instance, are really worried about Saturday. It's a hot day and the pubs reopen. They've said we have a pressure cooker building up, a perfect storm, and one of the senior members of the Police Federation has even talked about it being a real apocalyptic day.
Well, we work with the police on this. We have been working, and in fact, I speak to the Police Federation regularly, frequently. We've been working with the police in terms of the guidance that will be going out, because all these matters, all these issues come together with local authority licensing regulations in particular. Not all venues will necessarily be open at the same time on Saturday as well. Because, Andrew, if you know, there have been measures brought in so that people and restaurants and bars and pubs can also have off sales outside their premises in gardens.
People are hanging around in the streets, that's the trouble.
So, well, not so much hanging around in streets, but actually adapting their facilities so they can have seated spaces and things of that nature. Not all of that will come on stream immediately on Saturday. It'll be phased. That's a responsible approach to this. But we have been working with the police. The police have good guidance from the NCPPC. And we work constantly with the police in terms of how these measures come in place.
I know it's a really, really difficult balanced judgment to take. You've got to reopen the economy, start jobs coming back again, and all of that, and you've still got the pandemic around. But again, Jeremy Farrar was expressing some real fears about a really nasty second spike or an uptick in the winter. Can I ask, are you sure you've got this right?
Well, I think it's right that we are all conscientious about the concerns of another wave. I've spoken about this very publicly previously around measures at the border, in fact, air travel and travel in particular. We have to be very conscientious about the risk of a second wave. I think nothing would be more damaging for our country and for our economy if we do have a second spike, a second wave, which is why we're taking a very measured approach. It's measured, it's pragmatic, and it's responsible. And it's also, Andrew, guided by much of the science, the advice from SAGE, many of the advisors across other government departments and across those individuals advising government centrally.
There's been suggestions today in the papers that Leicester may have to face a local lockdown, the first we've seen of that kind. What can you tell us about that?
Well, that is correct, and we've seen flare-ups across the country already over recent weeks. Just in the last 3-4 weeks in particular, there was the example of a flare-up in one particular hospital over infection control. Now, of course, that is why we have a new mechanism, a joint biosecurity centre, which is very much geared up. It's been developed to address local flare-ups.
But there is going to be a Leicester lockdown, is there?
So there will be support going into Leicester, and in fact, the Health Secretary was in touch with many of us over the weekend, explaining some of the measures, the support on testing, resources that will go into the local authority as well, because with local flare-ups, it's right that we have a localised solution in terms of infection control, social distancing, testing, and many of the tools actually within the Public Health England space that will come together to control the virus and to stop the spread, so obviously that we can get on top of the infection.
Let's turn to another issue in the papers at the moment. I've got a planning application. I'm having a bit of trouble with it. Will it help my chances if I buy a ticket to a Conservative Party fundraiser?
No, it will not. It will absolutely not. And I speak now as a Member of Parliament that deals with planning at a constituency level, week in, week out. I think the fact of the matter is, Andrew, with the case that you're referring to very specifically, the issue has been dealt with, the documentation has been put out in the public domain.
I'll come on to that in a second, but your colleague, the Business Minister, Nadeem Zazdawi, said on Thursday, if people go to a fundraiser in their local area, Doncaster, for example, for the Conservative Party, they'll be sitting next to MPs, other people in their local authority. They can interact with different parts of the authority. He seems to suggest it's a good thing to go to Conservative fundraisers. You meet the MPs, you meet the ministers, you can put your case.
Well, I think with fundraisers, all political parties host fundraisers. It's not just the Conservative Party.
Okay.
And it's important, actually, that we raise money ourselves rather than being dependent on taxpayer funding, which is a situation we do not want in this country.
Have you ever been lobbied at a fundraiser?
I've been to many fundraisers. I speak to people of different backgrounds all the time, and I think it's not just planning, but we meet people who work for charities, NGOs.
They want something out of you, some of these people. Would you watch a video? If I had a 4-minute video of my planning application idea and I passed it to you at a fundraiser, would you watch that?
Andrew, I have 4 planning authorities that cover my constituency, so I probably would not be watching videos at all. But the fact of the matter is, when it comes to fundraisers, people of all sorts of background attend fundraisers. They are there to raise money for political parties in the way in which I've just said. That is the nature of fundraising for party politics in this country. Okay. But of course, we meet people with different causes, different backgrounds and different interests.
Can I run through the very basic facts about this case that we can I think, agree about? Which, first of all, that Mr. Jenrick did sit next to Mr. Desmond, sent him texts, and he tried to arrange a meeting with him. Second, that the developer, Mr. Desmond, asked him for a quick decision so he could avoid paying millions to what he called a Marxist council. Third, that Mr. Jenrick decided to do exactly what the developer wanted, against the advice of his own officials. And finally, that 2 weeks later, Mr. Desmond donated £12,000 to the Conservatives. Is all of that a coincidence?
Well, look, I haven't followed the details of every single decision of this, but what I do know, and what I can tell you, is that the correspondence, the documentation is out in the public domain on this particular application, and rightly so. It's a significant decision, a significant application. The papers are published. The Secretary of State has followed all issues around transparency. It's been discussed in Parliament a number of times. Questions have been answered on this. And the matter is deemed to be closed. This goes through a quasi-judicial process. So I think on that basis, the documentation is in the public domain.
I suppose it's the phrase, is deemed to be closed. The Prime Minister said the matter's closed. But lots of people, not just Marxist councils or Labour Party people, looking at this just don't like the smell. Let me read to you what the Daily Mail, one of your great supporters, has said about this case. Why on earth is Robert Jenrick still in his post? His decision to force through permission for a controversial housing development planned by a billionaire Conservative donor may not have been illegal, but it stinks to high heaven. If he had any sense of propriety, he would have resigned immediately after the deeply incriminating texts revealed his cosy relationship with the developer. That phrase, stinks to high heaven, is what a lot of people look at this and feel.
But at the same time, there's been transparency around all of this in terms of documentation and correspondence. And I think that's right. The public would expect that. And it's through that process of transparency that the matter's now been deemed to be closed.
Last month, a new record was set for boats being intercepted coming across the Channel. There's been lots of very distressing and disturbing reports of a big surge in people moving from France to Britain. Now, you know, you're taking back control of the borders, and you promised this was going to be a very rare phenomenon. What are you doing to stop it?
Well, there's a lot of work, Andrew, that's taking place with regards to illegal migration, and this is illegal migration. This is people coming from northern France, from parts of Calais, that are being trafficked to the United Kingdom. We are working with the French authorities on this, in particular, breaking up the camps, but also working with them in terms of policing the vast beaches in France. There is a lot of beach area, and they're being policed by the French police. But on top of that, we are looking to change our laws. So there are issues around meritless claims that have been coming through, people being trafficked, vulnerable people as well, I should add, children, women that are being threatened to be put on those boats. So there is a great deal of work that's taken place with the French authorities. We are also returning people that are coming to our country illegally through this particular route, because I think it's important to reference the fact that the individuals that are coming, they're coming from a safe country where they could be claiming asylum. Right. In France or even Germany or even in Belgium, some individuals have had long journeys and spurious routes, and it's important that other countries, other European countries, do much more to stop the flow of people coming through, stop the facilitation themselves, and ensure that they have the right kind of asylum processes in their country.
As we leave the EU fully, are you completely confident we're going to get the full cooperation of those countries, the friendly cooperation that we need to stop this?
Well, I'm not seeing anything to say that we are not. So when I look at our relationship with France and Belgium, in fact, we have regular dialogue, frequent dialogue on these particular issues. Illegal migration is an issue that doesn't just affect the United Kingdom, it affects European countries equally in a very severe nature through our ports, the porous borders, but also through the exploitation and trafficking that we've seen. So absolutely.
All right, very briefly, are you going to go abroad on holiday this summer?
I'll be working hard throughout the summer.
So no.
I'll be here.
All right, thank you very much indeed, Priti Patel. That's all from me.